Welcome back to another episode of Timebreaker Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel.
And I'm Anthony.
And welcome back for a brand new episode. This time we're going to be talking about Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Hope you guys had a great Labor Day weekend and throwing it to Anthony for some box office numbers.
So over the past weekend, we got to see the second biggest debut in the US during the pandemic at 75.5 million through Friday and Sunday and over 90 million over the 4-day. Granted, this is being recorded on Monday, so we do not have those final box office numbers for the weekend. In comparison to other films throughout the pandemic, it is second, only lower than Black Widow, and that's just barely, which I think is just phenomenal, considering the fact that it's a theatrical only release. Daniel, what are your thoughts on that number?
I think it's pretty good, and I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this like the best opening weekend for a Labor Day release?
Yes, the previous record holder for Labor Day weekend was Halloween 2, at, I believe, clocking in at 30 million over the 4 days, so this is pretty much triple.
Yeah, so that's like really freaking amazing, and and then it just like goes to show you, it just speaks volumes for the success of the film, not only during the pandemic, but also because this is like an origin movie. Like, we've known nothing of the character. This is his first outing, and for him to do numbers basically at the level of Black Widow, who's like one of those like staple Avengers, I think is like really impressive.
Right, and it goes to show that, Marvel as a brand has so much recognition that they're able to open a new hero that we've never even seen on the big screen before to the same levels of Black Widow. Now, granted, Black Widow did get a Disney Plus release, but I mean, take that out and my expectations is that Shang Chi is actually going to do better throughout his theatrical run than Black Widow did, and I guarantee you agree.
Oh yeah, totally. And also, I think this is just speaking great news just for the overall like box office, and like for the how willing people are going to see movies despite the pandemic. It's just like a good like transfer upwards, I guess. And even the performance of this movie, we've seen kind of potentially influence Venom's release, because that movie just bumped up ahead of what it was going to, because I think Sony realizes that there's some money to be made here in the movie industry despite what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see earlier today that they were so like scared to release it that they pushed it to October 15th, but now they brought it back forward to October 1st, and maybe it has to do with the fact that they chose the same release date as Halloween and they were only a week away from Dune. But regardless of the fact, Sony doesn't have a streaming service, so they are going to be 30 days probably exclusive in theaters. And if we go back and look at movies released previously this summer, Shang-Chi's numbers, I mean, they're outstanding. It opened greater than F9 and better than A Quiet Place Part 2, and I think we're going to see legs on the level of A Quiet Place Part 2, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely without the streaming option, I think it's going to do a lot better in the box office down the road.
In my personal opinion, I feel that in the long run, we're going to look at about 200 plus million here in the US, because Black Widow finished at around 190-ish and F9 finished at around 180. And so I think if you look at those and you imagine there's probably going to be more legs on this, because I feel like this is another culturally impacting film like Black Panther that we're probably we're probably looking at 200 at the minimum. But I mean, it wouldn't be too crazy to think maybe 225, 250, and that's before it even hits Disney Plus, maybe. I mean, it's really just going to depend on how well it holds over the next week.
Yeah, and do you have any takes on how it's doing, like, worldwide, overseas?
I believe overseas it made about 54 million, so overall for the weekend, I believe it's sitting around 145 million. And there's no Disney Plus here in the US or overseas, so it was theatrical only, and that is, I think, until mid-October.
All right, so thanks, Anthony, for those box office. I know he's like way more into that than I am, but now we're gonna go into like talking about the actual film and what we thought about it. And so, just gonna put out a spoiler warning out there. We're gonna be talking in depth about the movie and spoilers in and out, everything that happens. The movie's been out for several days now over the weekend, so hopefully you guys got a chance to see it. And if not, pause the video right here and then come back later once you've seen the movie, because I highly recommend you do. So what were your general thoughts on the movie, Anthony?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was way better than Black Widow, and especially for an origin movie, like typically those can be hit or miss, but this one I feel really stuck to landing, to be honest. And I knew nothing about the character going in because I don't read the comics, so getting to actually learn about this character throughout the film was pretty great, to be honest.
Yeah, for me too. I really enjoyed it for like an origin movie. To me, I feel like it had this. I had the same like enjoyment as like Iron Man or Doctor Strange. I think those are my two favorite origin movies, not counting Guardians because that's kind of like an ensemble thing. But this one's like right up there with the great origin movies, like in the MCU, at least for me. I really liked how they approached the character and like how it not only it stuck to the Marvel formula, yes, but I felt like it kind of branched out a little bit more than we're used to, and I really liked that freedom that it was telling.
Right, and I absolutely agree with that. Agree with that. Sorry, I absolutely agree with that. It was like it felt like yeah, it was a standard Marvel movie, but I felt like it had its own footing and it had its own identity of what it was doing. And especially for being the 25th film, it did feel fresh.
Yeah, and I think all that has to do is like accredited to like its roots in like Asian culture and like all the homages it's paying to towards like old like fighting films and kung fu cinema. Like there's lots of martial arts in this movie and there's a lot of Asian culture, and for me being Asian, I felt like that was really awesome, and to see what it's going to do like kind of like what you said, like what like Black Panther did. I think that's really important for this film and helped it get its own identity among like all the 25 Marvel movies.
Yeah, and for sure, I feel like the moment it starts, they really just point out the fact that this is not your normal Marvel movie. Like, this is one that is constructed, I felt, with like real care. Like, I felt like the filmmakers really cared about how they were representing Asian culture. And yeah, like the fight sequences are different than the Marvel movie, and I thought the fight sequences were just outstanding in this movie, especially when they were
They're so good.
outside. Especially when they were outside of the balcony and they were fighting on this catwalk, like that was awesome.
Yeah. So like going into the movie, so like it opens up and we get like I guess the legend of the Ten Rings, and it introduces us to the villain Wenwu, or the Mandarin, who's Shang Chi's father, and you kind of get the backstory. And he starts off like pretty like classic like warlordy, just standard Marvel villain, but then we get an introduction to Shang-Chi's mom, and there's a beautiful fight scene in the opening of the film that has lots of martial arts and influences in the fight, and it's just like very graceful, and it almost like felt like they were like dancing, and that just felt like so refreshing for a Marvel movie. And because they're able to go to these like Asian landscapes or and sometimes fantasy landscapes, they're just like so pretty compared to like some of like the cityscapes we're used to seeing in Marvel films.
Yeah, and I like you were talking about how it felt like they were dancing. That scene was just so beautifully shot. Like nothing fell out of flow. It was perfectly shot, and it conveyed that message. Like you got it immediately that this was conveying like these two individuals just falling in love, and yeah, it was almost poetic.
Yeah, and I think like especially how important like the family dynamic is with this film. It's almost like Shakespearean, because it's like the Wenwu is coming from like a really damaged and dark past, and then we get the mom who's like kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum, and we can see how even though like he's like a bad guy, like how good of an impact she has on his life and really turns him around. He steps away from the rings and has and starts a family with Shang Chi and his sister, and then it really just changes like the whole path, and we get to see like a glimpse of like the better side of the villain, which is like sometimes we don't always get like the multi-dimensional aspects of our villains, but we do in this film.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And then we kind of do like a jump to the future, and we like jump into Shang-Chi's life, and he's kind of a normal dude, and I thought that was like a really cool aspect that they went with it.
Like I really liked the fact that they took it as like a normal approach. Like he's like a nobody. it's like Guardians. Like he's a nobody, and we kind of get to step into his shoes at the beginning. I really like that.
Yeah, and like he's with Aquafina's character Katie, and she's fun. She's like the comic relief of it, and sometimes I'm like, the way Aquafina works for me. Like sometimes she's like a little over the top, but I felt like she had like a really good balance here with not only the funny but the emotion, and she's actually like pretty important to the story. Like actually,
I was pretty shocked that she, in the overall scheme of the movie, she paid off. Like at first, I thought she was just there for comedic effect, but they actually gave her a role.
yeah, it's like she kills the bad guy. I was like, what?
I mean, why not?
I mean, yeah, and like that totally like pays off the arc that she had to do with like the whole archery, and so like there was like a whole story arc there. So I thought that was like really good. But going back to like the beginning, it's just showing them in their normal life, and I liked how like they're just valet drivers, and it's just and he has to like pick her up from her apartment. She lives with her family. Like I thought it was just like so, just like casual but like fun at the same time.
Yeah, and just going back to like the beginning with them being just valet parkers, just the fact that like my first thought was that they would like own this expensive car, and then just nope, they're just the valets, and I was like, that's awesome because I feel like we're so used to just Marvel characters being just dirty, filthy rich. And so it's kind of nice to have one that's not like they felt like a normal person.
Yeah, and there's a bit of like a shock factor too because throughout the opening of the movie we see Shang Chi like being like the inheritance of like this huge empire under his father and this huge powerful organization, and then we like basically hard cut to him just being like a super normal life and like not having anything. So I just thought that shock factor was like really entertaining too.
Right, and I also felt that, moving later into the film when the bus sequence happens, I feel like it's a shock for both the audience and for the characters because I don't feel like because the way that they crafted his training, I don't feel like we knew particularly how well he was trained, and so getting to see that him fight on the bus first before seeing him train, I felt it was actually really neat in the film to do.
Oh yeah, that bus sequence is so crazy, and like you said too, like instead of showing everything and like front loading the film, what they choose to do instead is like sprinkle in flashbacks throughout the film, and we don't get the training till later. So seeing that fight sequence and what he's capable of, like you said, it shocked us. It shocked Aquafina's character, and that guy who like whips out his phone and starts live streaming. I feel like that's so contemporary. I feel like that totally would happen today. And just like he's like, I took some martial arts in like high school, so I'm gonna grade this fight because like everybody's got to be like an expert on everything nowadays. I thought that was so funny.
Oh yeah, dude, it was absolutely relatable, and I thought that was great.
But yeah, like the fight sequence is so cool, and this is like the first time. Well, I mean, the beginning fight with the parents is like really martial artsy, but this was like a different type of style, and just like how confined it was to the bus and how they used that space to work with, I thought was really cool. And in other movies you will see like if it's a tight space like this bus, we're just gonna do a lot of quick cuts, a lot of shaky cam for the action. But no, like the way the action is shot in this film, it's lots of wides. The camera moves with the characters, and we see everything. Simu Liu's actually doing like I'd say like 90% of the fighting in this movie, and we get to see it, and it just makes the movie so much more enjoyable because of it.
Yeah, and going into, saying at the beginning one was like a dance, this one was just a straight up brutal action sequence. Like you said, it felt like almost there were no cuts, and so it was just all really real the way that it was being shown. And I thought the action was great. I mean, it was very different from, something like Avengers Endgame or because again, we've never seen combat like this in any Marvel movies. So the film definitely has that going for it.
Yeah, for sure. And so that whole sequence gets taken care of, and then the characters start their adventure because now Katie's like, yo, how the heck did you know how to do all that fighting? And he's like, it's my dad or whatever. And so then they launch into the adventure basically, and they go looking for his sister, and then she's running this whole like underground black market fight arena, and then we get cameos from Wong and Abomination, and it was really cool. And just seeing like this whole other world was really interesting for me.
Yeah, I definitely liked it, and on top of that, just seeing Wong just the way he was introduced and the way he was in the film, like he had the best parts in this movie. I will not even lie.
Yeah, and like we saw in the trailer, like he was kind of getting his ass handed to him by Abomination. So I was like, how is he gonna fight? And the way he was like using the portals to use like Abomination's punches against, I thought that was so clever. Um, and yeah, Wong is awesome in everything he's in.
Yeah, and I think especially after taking so long since seeing Wong in action, I mean, he was in Endgame, but I don't think we really, he was there, but he didn't really do much. And so just the one scene where he opens the portal and he punches himself so hard he knocks himself out was just, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really awesome. And then we get introduced to Shang-Chi's sister and another strong female character introduced into the MCU. She was kind of like that outcast who wasn't able to be involved in any of the training, and so she kind of did it her own, and then she left on her own, and then made this entire empire, and now she's like ruling this underground thing by herself, and she's totally capable of kicking ass too.
Yeah, I was, I mean, it was pretty great watching her just whoop everyone's butt.
Yeah, and then that sequence leads into another great action sequence on the scaffolding outside where like all of the father's men come to like take the necklace. And again too, like the way it's shot and like the verticality, how the camera follows them from level to level on this scaffolding outside, is just stuff we've never seen before, and it's just so refreshing. That's all I can like say when I'm talking about this film.
I would say it's not only refreshing. I think personally that was my favorite action scene of the movie, because I think while the overall movie is really good, I think the ending action sequence didn't quite stick the landing, and so for me the scaffolding scene was my favorite when it came to the action sequences.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with you. That the ending was kind of like didn't stick it completely, and we'll talk about it when we get to that part of the film. But I do, yeah, like I love this part of the film. This action sequence was really awesome, and then we get introduced. I'm surprised they actually like introduced this, like, well, I mean, we already got introduced to the villain, but I'm surprised like the dad showed up this early. Like I thought like it would be like they'd have to escape, or his men would find him again, or they would take him back, but he was there himself, and I thought that was like kind of a shock. That's like, oh, this guy's not afraid to get his hands dirty and like actually be here.
The way I'd look at it is that the first half of this movie feels very similar to almost all of Black Panther, where the first, probably good first half of the movie is so well put together that you barely even recognize that you're halfway through the movie. Because I mean, I feel like that's the halfway point, is when the dad shows up after that fight. Like you're about halfway through the movie, where Black Panther, you get to the end and you're like, oh my gosh, the movie's almost over.
Yeah, I felt like the same way too. Like this is way later on in the film, but like when they're like gearing up and his men are about to show up, I was like, oh, this is we're at the final battle, okay. But so yeah, that kind of took me by surprise. But then, so yeah, the dad gets him, takes him back to his place, and we get more backstory on the dad and what happened to the mom, and it really just fleshes out the dad as like a multi-dimensional character. And for a second there, like I kind of like felt for him, and like didn't know, like, is he like totally bad, or is he kind of good, or where is this gonna go? Like, are they gonna get back together as a family, or what's going on?
Yeah, and I was actually kind of like trying to figure it out. I'm like, how is the mom speaking to him? Because like I was trying to figure out, like, is it true, or, and thankfully the film didn't, it wasn't like it was lingering on us for very long, but it was definitely an interesting aspect. And yeah, it feels like right after that action sequence, the movie kind of just, it takes a little bit of the brakes on, and it really dives into the villain, and it's something I feel like not enough Marvel movies do. I mean, especially if you can just compare it to Black Widow. I mean, Taskmaster is not defined at all as a hero, or sorry, as a villain.
Yeah, like the Mandarin in this film is like, he's probably up there in like A tier Marvel villain in my opinion.
Well, again, to even get into that tier, it really just means you have a purpose, and your purpose is well defined as to why.
Yeah, pretty much from the Marvel movies. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot to be good, but I wouldn't say he was good. I'd say he was like a really like arguably great villain for this film, and he does command a lot of emotion and a lot of power when he's on screen. Like when he shows up with the rings, like he means business. Like I thought that one fight scene, it was very brief, but I thought it was beautiful how they shot it. It's when he goes with Shang Chi as a child to go fight some of the gang members that killed his mom, and the way the camera moves, like it starts showing him beating him up, and then it kind of like turns into a mirror, and then we see the fight continue in the mirror, and then like the mirror shatters and like the fight's over. I thought that was like a really clever way of shooting the fight scene.
I think it was just showing just how, at first he just goes there for simple revenge, but instead it turns into something that's just violent. And I think it's what it's referring to when it shatters is like he went all out, and especially the last guy, doesn't he just straight up murder him right in front of him?
Right in front of Shang-Chi. Like he's already out for the count, but then he just takes the rings and just ends him. And it makes me wonder like a little bit like, is that just him as a character? Is that like kind of what the rings have done to him over the course of these thousands of years, or is it just like an accentuation of the character? Like if you're a good guy, the rings are going to make you a great guy, or if you're kind of a bad guy, they're going to make you even more evil. Like it's just some more questions I have for maybe the future to answer.
Yeah, I feel like a sequel may or may not address that.
Yeah, because like I mean, they even like teased like in the post-credit scene, like all the people they have no idea what the heck the rings are.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it also just goes to show that even the characters inside the universe have no idea what these things are, and so as an audience, I feel like we're allowed to be able to walk out and go, yeah, I don't really know what the rings do, but they look cool because that's really all they do.
Yeah, but when they're like in the dad's complex, we get another nice cameo that I was hoping they would pull off, and then they actually did, and that was Ben Kingsley back as Trevor Slattery, our favorite actor in the MCU. I thought that was fun.
I'm curious if this made Marvel fans angry or happy, because so many people hated him. But I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, the greatest guy ever in Marvel is back.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know how you can not like it. Like if you're angry at Iron Man 3, like I feel like they address it and make good on it by having Tony Leung as the father. And so I feel like that kind of deals with the whole Mandarin issue, and so now you can only like Ben Kingsley in this film.
Well, right, and no doubt about it, the actual Mandarin is just he's so good, and like as a villain, and he has a purpose. And comparing him to the Mandarin, the fake one that we got in Iron Man 3, I mean, it really shows that there's a huge difference, and that Iron Man 3 wasn't actually going to portray him. Yeah,
and he comes with another character that's kind of whack, but kind of works out. This is the direction that Disney's going. You have to have a tiny, cute animal kind of character. We got Baby Groot, we got Grogu, and now we have Morris. Continuing the trend. I thought that was unexpected, but it worked out.
It shocked me a little, I'll be honest. I was like, where's its face?
Yeah, it's really weird, and you're just like, what is that thing? But he's kind of cute and kind of funny, I guess.
You definitely grow to him.
Yeah, and then we get like this introduction to basically like where the film is going on. The dad puts the necklaces in, and we get this map with water that was really beautifully animated.
This was actually just to clarify, this was before that scene, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm just like saying like there's a roadmap, like that was kind of like leading to where the film was going, and then so that propels our heroes to like kind of leave on their own and go into the forest. And albeit I feel like it was kind of cheesy, like how easily they were able to do it, just based on Morris just be like, yo, turn right and go left. Like I feel like thousands of people have been trying to do this the entire time.
I definitely thought it was too easy, but at the same time, the way it was executed was just so good. I'm like, you know what? I'll let it pass, because literally he's just like, turn left now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it was funny, and but it just kind of got me thinking, like, the Mandarin has had Morris this entire time. Like you'd think he would use him, but whatever.
Plot devices.
Yeah, plot. But then they like go to this. I don't even know what to call. Like, I know it had Ta Lo. I think that's the name of it. I don't know if it's in Earth or if it's like a dimension or it's a portal to like another dimension or universe or what, but it was very exotic and beautiful. And this is where like the movie kind of takes a turn and dips more into fantasy than like, action, adventure, Marvel superhero.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that, and I too have no idea where it was taking place, and the movie really didn't tell us where it takes place either.
Yeah, but then we get introduced to like that whole culture and the mom side of the culture, and this way of life that these warriors and protectors are. We get a little bit more of a lore dump when the ant gets introduced, with like how these beings, these like flying bat soul sucker dudes, are like being trapped behind a portal, and they're manipulating the dad to try and come and break free. So it kind of just clarifies everything, but it also makes you feel kind of sad that it's like the tragedy that the dad is like being manipulated, and you get kind of feel for him because the love for his wife is so true that he's willing to go to these extremes to get her back.
Yeah, and I think my favorite part of this was, we then also have him training, and Shang Chi kind of has to, come to the realization that he might have to defeat his own father, and that's pretty intense.
Yeah, and it just everybody gets like a little training montage arc, even Aquafina's, with the bow, and that comes into play later on. And we get more of those flashbacks showing like Shang-Chi's like darker past, and we figure out that like he's actually like a killer, and has that darkness in him. Um and then he's like, yeah, I'm totally gonna kill my dad. And I think it was just like the movie overall, like it presents this idea of like, yeah, we have like good and we also have our like the bad, and we kind of can't be one without the other, and so we just kind of funnel them both in and find that like inner balance.
Yeah, and I think the film perfectly set this up because the whole film he had denied that he had ever killed anyone, and I think this was the first time he himself had to accept the fact that all these years ago he did kill his mother's murderer, and that now, even though he hadn't killed in years, he's now gonna have to do it again, and this time to someone he cares about.
Yeah, and then that leads into, I guess, like the third act, final battle sequence that we're all accustomed to with the Marvel movies. And I have to say, like, it was my least favorite because of how, like, just army based and CGI based the fight was. The father's army comes in and fights the people of Talo, and not a whole lot of stuff's going on, but the dad ends up fighting Shang-Chi, and we're squaring off. And of course, because I've seen the trailer, I know that Shang-Chi wasn't using the rings in this fight, so I thought he was going to get his ass kicked and then come back again, and that's totally what happened.
I think the biggest shock for me, at least in this like final battle, was the fact that his dad sacrificed himself. I don't think I was anticipating that, and so it was a little bit of a shock that he, sacrificed the ring, sacrificed himself in order to give Shang-Chi a chance to pretty much save himself and his sister. And but then, going to other aspects of the ending and why for me it just really didn't stick. The dragon, like the dragon wasn't even mentioned. It just kind of showed up and was, I mean, it did what it wanted.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Deus Ex Machina where it just like comes in and saves the day. I mean, it almost died, I'll give it that, but yeah, it's like kind of this OP being that just comes into play, and you're like, oh, there's a dragon. I mean, it's a cool looking dragon and does some stuff. But yeah, going to your point with the Mandarin sacrificing himself, I think that moment kind of solidifies him as like one of the greater villains and greater characters that we have in this film, because he realized that he was being manipulated by I don't even know what the heck to call them, the bat creatures or the devil, the demons or whatever. He was being manipulated by them and realized that his actions were going to cause the death of everybody, including Shang-Chi and his sister. And in that moment, he saw that the thing was going to kill Shang-Chi, and he made a choice. He's like, I'm going to take the hit, and then because I caused all this. And so he does that, and then he's like, well, I'm going to die anyway, so the rings have caused so much pain and suffering to my family, I'm just going to give them away and give them to my son, because he saw the son using them. And I thought it was very cool how they made the choice of the differences between when Wu uses the rings versus when Shang Chi uses the rings, like the styles. I mean, the colors obviously make it a very obvious choice, but just the way the style and the way the rings are utilized by each character kind of speaks to, where their headspace is at.
I okay. While I do agree with that, it runs into another issue that some of these Marvel films just have an issue of doing, and it's that like just disbelief. Okay, Shang-Chi has never once touched these rings, but because it's in the final act when he finally gets his hands on it, like plot device is just used that. Yup, he is a master at it and he's flawless. And I don't know. I've never really liked that aspect of any of the Marvel movies where a hero can just pretty much do what he wants because for the sake of the plot he needs to.
Okay, yeah, I'll give you that. For me personally, when I was watching it, I wasn't really thinking of that because I feel like, at least the way I was internalizing it, is like the rings are kind of like these beings of them. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where like the rings kind of got their own thing going on, so it's just a reflection of the user. And so I feel like he was like working with the rings, and like he wasn't just using the rings. That's just how like I was viewing it. So I kind of was like, okay, that the rings are doing.
That's true. Maybe I wasn't thinking of it right.
But again, like they don't really address it. That's just how I was taking it in. So like you said, maybe in like a sequel or another thing, we're gonna see like what the whole thing with the rings is all about.
Yeah, again, I feel like the rings, while they're important to the story, I feel like they were put on the back burner for a reason because I think they want to explore in a different way in the next one.
Yeah, and also too, like because they weren't super explained, we don't know like the limits of them. Because Katie fulfills her arc. She makes the shot, hits the beast like right in the neck, which I thought did way more damage than it was supposed to, but whatever. And then Shang-Chi like does like this ultimate Goku move or whatever, just finishes it with the rings, and I'm like, I didn't even know they could do that, but I'm like, okay, that makes sense, I guess. So I think that's why they were holding back, because we don't know the extent that the rings can go to.
Yeah. I mean, it really just, the rings feel like Thor's hammer in that sense. They can do what the plot needs it to do, and until they're explained, yeah. I mean, I think they're just doing what they want with them for now.
Yeah, like in reality, like when Wenwu's army comes, he could like kill all of them with the rings and just keep going and then break the gate open, but just for the plot, he just doesn't, right?
Right. But again, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't have the emotional payoff. But yeah, after the battle, the film, really just truly wraps up, and I feel like it wrapped up fairly quickly too.
Yeah, it was really fast. I do think it was kind of clever how they bookended it with how they kind of started it, because Shang-Chi and Katie go on these dates with, like, I guess their friends. They go out for drinks, and the first one was kind of awkward, and they're not really doing anything with their lives, and now they, like, low-key save the world, and it was just, like, a really fun scene, and then and then how Wong just comes out of nowhere, too, making an amazing appearance. I thought that was super fun.
Yeah, I just love the fact that the friends they were out with are just like, okay, we understand, like, we made you mad last time, but you don't need to go this far. And they're just kind of like in disbelief. They're like, no, like, this really happened. They're like, yeah, sure. And then Wong just shows up, and they're
He's
just
like, yo,
like,
come on.
whoa, we were wrong. They were telling the truth.
Yeah, and then another callback, and this is in the credits scene, is they're like, yeah, we should go to bed, and then they do the karaoke thing again, but this time with Wong. I thought that was so funny.
Oh, yeah, dude. That was. My theater was dying during that.
Yeah, and then the other post-credit scene we get is, because now that the father's dead, the Ten Rings organization is kind of left in a power vacuum, and the sister ends up coming in and fulfilling that void, and she's, I guess, like, transferred her fight club there, but also now has all these arms dealers and assassins at her disposal to do whatever she wants. So she's kind of a wild card going into the future of the MCU, I guess.
Yeah, that was also how I took the ending, is like, because he died, she moved her organization into it, and yeah. But I mean, it was kind of funny because she was supposed to disassemble it, and instead she assembled it. But it was actually a Marvel movie that I felt, thankfully, was not tied to the rest of Phase 4 like I did when Black Widow ended, and I went, oh, if you didn't watch Falcon and Winter Soldier, this is going to be a really confusing scene. And I didn't feel that way in this one, thankfully.
Yeah, I like how, since it was an origin movie and they tend to be like this, that it was more contained to the story it was telling, and that was it. And I really appreciated that. Because I mean, it is doing a lot of world building and stuff. We're introducing a lot of, magic stuff and spirituality, and, it was kind of like influenced like a little bit from Avatar, like earth bending, water bending, that kind of sort of thing, and all these like spiritual animals in this other dimension. So it was already building a lot of stuff that contributed to the MCU while staying like contained in its own film.
Yeah, and I totally see your point on that. But also, it felt like the first, like, fresh breath of air we've had in Phase 4 so far. Because I felt like, granted, there was Black Widow, but outside of Black Widow, it's just all been about multiverse, and it was kind of just a breath of fresh air to have one thing in Phase 4 outside of Black Widow. Sorry, I just have to keep mentioning that. But like after Loki, after WandaVision, like those two were both so invested in the multiverse, and so after watching both of those, just being able to have a movie that's very just on the ground and a very fresh, unique take. It's just like Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a very unique take on character. Now, granted, that was on characters we already knew.
I totally agree that this was like a breath of fresh air and just so different, and was doing its own thing while sticking to the Marvel roots and staying in that universe. But it just felt so unique and different and had its own story to tell, and I just really appreciated that.
Yeah, and so this movie was actually, so I skipped Black Widow in IMAX. Once I saw this one in IMAX, this was not like, it had everything formatted in IMAX, but again, it didn't have that like oomph to it, to be honest. Like Thor Ragnarok had their sequences so like perfectly formatted that having that extra space really just paid off, where I didn't ever get that sense in this movie. And maybe it was just the way it was shot. Maybe it was just so excellently shot for regular format that in IMAX you didn't really need it. But the IMAX format, I don't know, it was a little bit of a bummer this time around.
Yeah, I mean, I did not see it in IMAX, and so I thought it was like excellently shot as is. So maybe, yeah, you're right. Like they were focusing more on just that general theatric experience. But overall, I thought it was like a really solid film. It's probably my top three so far this year, and in that upper tier Marvel movies, I wouldn't say it's up there with like the ensemble films, but I think that's kind of being harsh because that's unfair to like really compare those two. But in terms of like the origin films, this is definitely up there for me.
Origin Films is definitely up there. As an overall, I want to say it's either somewhere around the top 10 or it's just right under it. Because there's definitely a lot of better films that we've had. But again, it's an origin movie, so I feel like you really have to compare it to other origin movies. And in that case, yeah, it really sits in like the top 3 origin movies that we've had.
Yeah, for sure. And just great job overall. I'm really excited to see Simu Liu in more stuff because I really liked his portrayal of the character, and he's got a lot of charm. And I could definitely see him being a leading man, and just seeing him in like the interviews that I've watched, like he really cares about this stuff, and I really appreciate that, what he's doing, spreading this culture and just this energy to the MCU.
Yeah, and just going into other MCU properties, we had Chadwick Boseman get introduced as Black Panther in Civil War, which made me super hyped for Black Panther because I thought his portrayal was so great and I just wanted to see him in his own film. And having seen this has made me really want to see him in an ensemble movie. I want to see how his character interacts with others, and so I'm really excited for just seeing him again, because hopefully either the next time we see him, either we're going to have another solo film or we're going to see some type of Avengers type ensemble and get to see him, play well with others, as Tony would say.
Yeah, and also too, like I want some clarification on where he stands in the power level with the rings. Like, can he fight Thor with the ring? Like I just want to know like how he stacks up against the other members. And until we get like that kind of team up vibe, we won't really know.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that's going to do it. Solid movie. Hope you guys enjoyed, and go see it if you haven't already. But yeah, that's all for me.
Yeah, thank you for watching this episode, and if you enjoyed, make sure to click that like button.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care.
See ya. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Timebreaker Podcast.
If you did enjoy it, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe and make sure to ring that notification bell for new episodes every Wednesday.
See you next week.